27th of 1969, which was my birthday. I went into the Marine Corps in the Air Wing.
And we were in the military in the United States Air Force, and we worked on nuclear weapons.
We were the first troops that went inland during the Vietnam War.
I learned about the bombing of Pearl Harbor as I was walking down the steps of the First Christian Church in Modesto, California.
Yeah, going through the boot camp was no fun, but I laugh about it now.
And it seemed like when he drank the hard liquor, he would immediately go back to Vietnam.
And they'll say, isn't that a contradiction in terms, military intelligence? And I say, not to the enemy.
It was during the period when people were deciding whether to go into service or rebel against the service because of the war in Vietnam.
It had a devastating impact on me about this was really war.
Okay, he's going to be talking to you. You do what you want to do.
What's that?
You're going to start talking whenever he wants you to, and you just tell him when you went into service and what you did in there, and tell a little bit about chasing the girls if you want. I don't care. But anyway, just talk about your history in the service.
Oh, I went in 41, I guess it is. I went in the Army, Air Force, 20th Air Force, and it took us 38 days to get to Saipan. There was about 2 days without anything to eat. Finally, we got the rations. But anyway, I stayed there 15 months on Saipan. And Guam, we shipped over for point system. But I was a crane operator.
Oh, crane operator.
Yeah. Anyway, we stayed there handling bombs and demolitions and serviced the B-29s for the other bomb crew. We'd get everything ready, and then they come in at night and pick it up, put it on the plane. The first air raid we had, they said, oh, that's just Navy, they just practiced it. I said, the hell, you see the bullets going through the plane. And my buddy, Battle, his name was Battle, he took my place. I was going, and then they said, no, you stay and operate the crane, give him a break, let him go over the truck. So he took. And that afternoon he got killed.
When I reached 18, just 2 months after Pearl Harbor, I went to Stockton Field in Modesto to enlist in the Army Air Corps as the Aviation Cadet Program. We sailed out on July 1st in a 60-ship convoy for England. D-Day was, what, June 6th of 45?
Sounds right to me.
So all of that was going on, and that was, of course, one of the reasons they were sending us over there. They've been losing so doggone many pilots and airplanes. Well, I flew as co-pilot. Our targets, practically all of them, were on the bridges and marshalling yards behind the German army, trying to keep the German army from advancing into our troops during the war. So we were bombing right behind the Germans and in the area of the German army at all that time. The first mission I went on, we had a terrific number of anti-aircraft fire, and it's scary as all heck out because these things are going off all around you. I had one mission where an enemy shell went through the wing of my airplane about 10 feet from me and exploded up above the airplane.
If they didn't explode when it hit.
If it had exploded when it hit, somebody else could be telling you this story today.
I'm Ralph Seeley, and I'm 94 years old. I was in the World War II. I went in up to Camp Roberts. I had an appendix attack, and I was in the hospital. They landed C-47s on the parade ground there and taking the guys I trained with over to the Battle of the Bulge. And me being in the hospital kept me out of the Battle of the Bulge. After I got out of the hospital with this appendix attack, They didn't need me over there anymore. They said, we got to send you guys over to the Philippines. We waited ashore there and saw the results of all the battles. But there was a guy standing on the beach there with a foghorn or bullhorn. Called out 3 names, and mine was one of them. And they pointed to a spot on the beach that said, stand over there. Pretty soon a guy come along and says, follow me, you guys are in the combat medics. I think the way they would like to have had it was a medic with every squad, but I think it turned out more like a medic with every platoon. But there was 2 of us working, and we stopped bleeding whenever we could, and you know, a guy on each end of a litter, carried him back to the aid tent.
One day I was up to the toilet there, latrine they called it, reading my girl's letter, and I was walking down. Here come the 2 fighters, and here they come right at me. And I thought, oh, this is it. And I dived in the rocks in a coral for the shower, but they didn't fire on me. I had already used the bullets. And they circled around, went around the suicide, the big plane crashed in. And these guys in the foxhole crying. I said, come on, get out of there. I said, them guys are gone now. They're up there in the planes, you know. Mm-hmm. They were crying. 2 big guys had a big foxhole dug.
Fred Wackerman, Corporal, 5th Cavalry Regiment, Armored Infantry. I was waiting to be drafted for the World War II, but they quit the draft, and very shortly after that, Korea started up, and they drafted me into the Korean War. And that's when we went to the 5th Cavalry Regiment. I met 5 guys from Mariposa that I knew and was raised with some. And Clarence Vineyard was one, Bobby Wass was one, Elgin and Elwin Roan were 2, and Ernie Smithers, who died on the battlefield, and all Mariposa guys. The guys from Mariposa got put into different companies, except for Bobby Wass. Him and I were buddies right together, same foxhole, same tent, same thing, and the same duties. And as time went on, it kept going, you know, and whatever come up that they needed doing, we went and did it. That was whatever came up. A lot of it was not good. We had to get bodies back to where you can get a vehicle to them, some of the bad part of it. We happened to be assigned to an area right beside an Australia unit, and those were the happy-go-lucky, best damn soldiers that I met over there. And they'd come down to our area once in a while, and they'd get a gin ration, a bottle, and we'd get a beer ration, and the Aussies come down, and we gave them our hot beer for their hot gin. After a while, I don't know whether Bobby and I were alive or not, we were so damn drunk.
I graduated from high school in '53, and then enlisted in the Marine Corps shortly after. This was the first time I've ever been away from home, and it was quite an experience. Yeah, going through the boot camp was not fun. You had to be disciplined, and they discipline you the first time you set foot on a Marine Corps recruiting base, MCRD. I was when the party stopped. The drill instructors were big guys, bigger. They treated us pretty rough there. Hit us in the stomach and knocked the wind out of us. It was kind of for us that weren't used to that kind of a discipline.
When I was stationed at Bethesda, Maryland, I was working in the psychiatric ward. We did counseling. People who really didn't want to be in the service, trying to get out, you know, on psychiatric. And, you know, you did the counseling, you trying to help them out, you know. It's a lot of it separation from family, which I was running into a lot. And the regiment, especially going through boot camp. Boot camp was really hard on a lot of people.
We have one that jumped off a second-story roof and injured his back so he could get out on injury.
I worked with a gentleman that he decided he didn't like the military anymore, and so he decided he was going to eat his way out of the military.
Growing up the way I did with a father that was ex-military, I was raised in a household that was very, very strict. So when I arrived at boot camp, really it was a breeze. I had no problems whatsoever. There was one gentleman that spent 3 or 4 nights crying all night, wanting to go home. After the 4th day, he was shipped back.
I laugh about it now, and we just go through all these different phases. So I think that it done me good and put me just about where I'm at today.
My name is Joe Marks, or Joseph Marks. I enlisted in the Army in May 1965.
My name's Bill Yaley. I'm a former United States Marine. I always wanted to be a Marine ever since I was a little kid.
I went to Vietnam in October of '68.
5 days after my 18th birthday, I arrived in Vietnam.
When you came in country, there were several ways to come in. They'd come into Cam Ranh Bay, or the Marines would come into Da Nang. Army, most of us flew in down here in the Saigon area, Ton Son Nhut and Bien Hoa.
I went to Vietnam on April 10th, 1965, and we had an amphibious landing in Da Nang.
It was on April 13th, 1966. And that night was the largest mortar attack they had encountered. They started the mortars at Camp Alpha, where all the military personnel were coming into country, leaving country, and going on R&R. And that's where the mortars started landing. And then they walked it across the airfield to get the aircraft, which was their main target, is the aircraft. But the effect it had on me that night of hearing a lot of people get wounded and killed and screaming had a devastating impact on me about this was really war, and that I was really there doing this.
My job in South Vietnam, I was an infantry platoon commander. It was early in the war, so we were the first troops that went inland.
I was in the infantry, and the infantry, you did a lot of humping, we called it. We carried like 60 pounds on our back the majority of the time, and we were humping the jungle. After doing this a few times, I realized that the VC, they knew a lot more about their country and where to get us and where we were at than we did, because they always picked and chose the time and place that they were going to ambush us.
It was mostly guerrilla warfare we were involved in, which means we'd go out on small patrols looking for the Viet Cong, and of course they were looking for us as well.
I was given the opportunity to go into Brigade LRPS. That's what they had at the time, and that stood for a long-range recon patrol.
Hunt and fetch it kind of team. The Green Beret would go out and find it, and then we had to go out and take care of it. And we worked in 6-man teams.
And we'd go out on these patrols, and the weather was miserable. You're sweating all the time, you're walking through swamps, you're pulling leeches off of you, you're spiders and ants that bite, reptiles, things that I was not accustomed to.
These were dangerous missions. We saw the enemy. Our job was to locate, find, call in artillery or airstrikes.
A lot of different missions. Some of them were CIA, covert, and Army intelligence things.
I felt safer being 6,000 yards out in front of the lines with 12 of my men than I did back in the battalion headquarters, because I knew my Marines knew what to do.
I felt much safer being out there with 5 or 6 people than I did with 150 people in a company.
3 Green Beret 6 of us Rangers and 2 Navy SEALs. And we were supposed to go up and destroy a prisoner of war camp. When we got there, the prisoner of war camp had been moved. And we had to go up through Laos, and Cambodia, and in the southern tip of North Vietnam. Everything kind of went along okay. We traveled at night most of the time, and it wasn't until we got to LZ Sally, which is supposed to be our pickup area. Old Charlie Kong, he was sitting there and he was waiting for us. Out of the 6 of us, 3 of us made it back.
Unfortunately, one of my Marines was killed and 4 of them were injured during our patrolling. And I also in Vietnam lost some fellow officers.
I went into the Marine Corps in the Air Wing, had the opportunity to work on helicopters and was a crew chief and door gunner and mechanic.
I was in the Army and I was a combat medic. I was drafted, and on February 14th we went to Vietnam. I'll never forget that day. And as we flew out of San Francisco and looking back over the lights and the Golden Gate Bridge and the Bay Bridge, I thought, this is my last time I'll be seeing anybody.
My name's Keith Stoll. I went to Vietnam in June of '67. I was a door gunner on a Huey. We had a 60 machine gun, and the crew chief on the other side had a 60. And then the gunships, of course, had all the miniguns and rockets.
My name is Jim McLaughlin. I spent 2 tours in Vietnam as a helicopter pilot. The first one in 1967-68. And then I spent 2 years in Germany. Then I came back for a second tour in Vietnam in '71.
Went to Da Nang at Marble Mountain Air Facilities, attached to a CH-46 squadron there, HMM 263. Had some wonderful experiences with wonderful guys I met in school. We were in, from our tech school all the way to Vietnam. We were all together. There's a group of about 10 of us.
And we ended up being in Long Binh. And so I was out in the field for about 6 weeks, maybe less. And I said, God, please take me right now, because I don't like this hot mess and being really shot at. So I got new orders, and I was shipped into 3rd Field Hospital, which is just out from Tan Son Nhut. We were in the Cho Lan area, which is your Chinese area, is just out of Saigon.
Went to Tainan, Vietnam. It's about 24 miles west of Saigon. Wound up going to an aviation company, the 187th Assault Helicopter Company, and wound up being on slicks. A slick is a troop carrying one, was on a Huey, and it was, we could carry up to 5, 6 guys depending on how much gear they had. There was a pilot, co-pilot, a crew chief, and a door gunner. And the crew chief had a gun, a 60 machine gun also. And we would go pick up the infantry and take them out into the field and drop them off, let them do their maneuvers, come back and pick them up, which was okay. But when they called for a hot LZ, they've already spotted the enemy in there, probably the day before, or the infantry has. We could start shooting right away. And the gunships would follow us, the slicks would follow us in on both sides, and they'd use their miniguns and rockets and help us secure the area.
I'd only been in country about 5 days, and all I could think of was, why are they shooting at me? I'm a nice person. If they only knew me, they wouldn't be trying to kill me. Well, I got over that. And when I was flying gunships, I was pretty aggressive. About 35 years after I left Vietnam, I went to my first reunion, and 2 guys walked up to me, and I knew their faces, but I couldn't remember their names. And I'm standing there and they go, we remember you. You were one of the good ones. That's better than the Medal of Honor.
One of my good friends, Bruce Dennis Olson, was 17 when he joined the Marine Corps. He had to get his parents to sign. And one day he was doing medevac. We flied several different missions at Marble Mountain Air Facilities. And Bruce lifted off in a helicopter and got right over China Beach, and the helicopter disintegrated in the air. We lost George Van Gundy, Bruce, and the co-pilot. And the corpsman and the crew chief made it out okay. What was real perplexing to me was just a few days before that, I had replaced all the major components in the helicopter, the forward aft transmission, mix box, the engines. I didn't do it personally myself, but I did it with a crew of guys. And we were really troubled when we first heard that Bruce went down, and wondered what we might have done to not put something together right. What Carter pin did we leave out? Fortunately, when they got the pieces of the helicopter up by some of the covered revetments that they had there, we were able to see that the forward transmission had a disconnected hose that had, they're high pressure stainless steel hoses that transfer the oil to the oil coolers. And we could see that there's little pins on them. The pins had popped out and they weren't sheared, so we know it somehow that thing just came loose and had oil starvation of the forward transmission and seized up and brought the blades down through the cabin.
I knew he was a Vietnam vet when I married him and didn't know of any issues that might be there. We had a lot of foster children and we were busy with them. It was just a busy life, him working and I was at home with the kids all the time. But when we moved away from the mountains down into the city and only had a 10-year-old at home, then he started having nightmares, and then they became more frequent, and we were able to get hooked up with the vet center in Fresno, and that helped him a lot. When I first started going to the support group for the wives, your first time was a very, very emotional, because you have to tell your story to all the other ladies and the facilitator. And I didn't know why my husband was having nightmares. I didn't know what was going on with him. And so this group of ladies really helped me cope with that issue. Several years ago, I went to the Vietnam Wall. It was very touching because we found the names of his friends. And it was emotional for me because of what he felt. And even the World War II memorial was very special. They're just hallowed places to know that those people gave their lives for our country.
My crew chief, in April of '68, he was shot in the head. We went into a village to evacuate the villagers and infantrymen, and coming out, he was shot. And what is really disturbing about this whole thing is, when we went in, there was a no-fire zone. When it's a no-fire zone, we cannot shoot. Even if we get shot at, we have to call it in. And so when he got shot, we couldn't shoot back, which to me was one of the really downsides of the Vietnam War, was the rules and regulations you had to go by to fight that. So I'm dealing with that even today.
He had a really hard time talking about Vietnam. They wouldn't talk about it when they got back because unless you were there, no one really understood what you went through or what you were going through, so you just kind of kept it all inside. After a while, he developed a drinking problem. He was a beer drinker, but he was a happy beer drinker, which was good. He didn't get mean or anything, but at Christmas time, he would have one glass of hard liquor. And it seemed like when he drank the hard liquor, he would immediately go back to Vietnam. One night he had one of his episodes, and so we sat down and we actually talked. And I said, "Why do you think you go back to Vietnam when you drink?" He says, well, he says, I blame myself for my crew chief getting shot. And I asked him, I said, well, was there anything you could have done to prevent it? And he said, no. And I said, well, it wasn't your fault and there was nothing you could do. And, you know, that was kind of an aha moment for him. And he's like, well, yeah, you know, that's right. It opened him up. Well, now you can't shut him up. If he finds someone that's been to Vietnam, he'll talk to you for hours, hours, hours on end.
We all have purposes in the military. Mine was to interrogate prisoners of war, returnees to the South Vietnamese side. I arrived in country 23 August 1970, stepped off the plane at Tan Son Nhut and was hit with a blast of humidity and heat that just sucked the air right out of my lungs. This was in February of '71, and I'm at the Saigon Zoo with a buddy, and he was trying out his new camera, and I struck a pose. A week later, I was at the Tan Son Nhut Zoo. Tan Son Nhut Zoo. Only there are no animals in that zoo. There were only POWs. Every animal cage was packed to the brim with POWs. Packed, standing, no room to sit down. I was there on a what they called a go team, ground operational, seeking a particular prisoner, which is extremely difficult to find when you have 50 men crammed into a location that would hold maybe 20 men. And they are all crying, holding out their hands through the bars and saying in Vietnamese, "Pick me, pick me." They did not care why I was there. They just wanted out, no matter what it meant. And it was a long time before I could visit any zoo in the U.S. after that.
He's told me stories when he was there. I have a picture of him at the Saigon Zoo where he actually looked somewhat happy. His year there, I think I've heard almost all the stories. They come back to haunt him. Sometimes he'll wake up and his nightmare will be sort of high school mingled with Vietnam and ranch. 3 stress attacks where he thought he was having heart attacks. No, he's had at least 5. 3 of them were hospitalized. When you're married to someone like John, you're so appreciative of the sacrifices that our men and women have made.
I had some real good friends of mine. I took off for a 2-week R&R to Sydney, Australia. There was Toro, Crow, and Christopher Columbus that were caught up in an ambush and they didn't make it. Well, Toro got caught with an RPG round and took both legs and 1 arm. When I come back from R&R and I found that out, well then I carried guilt around for a long time. I had nightmares. I found out that Toro's fiance gave him his ring back and said that she could not marry a cripple. Okay, fine. So this little pea brain up here gets to working, and I was going to go to New Mexico and kill her. Because I know Toro and Toro worked and fought for this country. And how you can take somebody that got caught up in a bad situation and toss him over there in the trash and say, well, you're not good enough for me. It's bullshit. I was home 10 days from Vietnam. Of course, you could tell with my haircut and my fatigue jacket and all that crap. This guy says, you a Vietnam veteran? I said, yes, I am. He said, well, were you one of them baby killers? I wound up putting his head through a jukebox and then threw him out through a plate glass window. And I got a 90-day sentence. And I was talking to one of the inmates, and he was in there for life. He was being transferred to Soledad. And I said, you know, that's not what I want for my life. She's not worth it anyway.
My name's Jackie L. Leard, Oklahoma resident. Spent over 20 years in the Army, went to Korea in 1961, I think, or 61. We formed a company down there. I'm not privileged to tell you everything, but it was a dog company. We had 72 dogs in this thing, and that was another chore for me as a supply sergeant to get all this food for these dogs and stuff. And then I had orders to go to Fort Benning, Georgia, assigned to the 11th Air Assault Division. Is our colonel in 1st of the 9th Cavalry. He had a birthday there. So the sergeant major of the squadron, he decided that he would do a little gag gift thing for him. So he went out and found a farmer that had a nice white mule, and he brought that in the maneuver area and presented it to Colonel John B. Stockton just as a gag. Well, Colonel John B. Stockton, he fell in love with that mule, and he would not let that mule go. So we had to scramble around. The sergeant major did ask all the NCOs within the squadron to divvy up some money, because this old farmer, he wanted to get rich off this mule. And just about did too. When we all got loaded up to go to Vietnam, we was all wondering what's going to happen to Maggie the mule. Well, Colonel Stockton had an idea, and he did. He got the mule on an aircraft carrier, and that mule went to Vietnam with us.
My name is Richard Brown, and I was in the United States Navy from 1966 through 1969. I wound up working on C-130 brake systems, learned aviation hydraulics, and lo and behold, in January of that year, I got orders to the USS Enterprise.
My name is Michael Franklin, and I was in the service from 1968 to 72, United States Navy, assigned to Nav Air as an ordnanceman. I did 2 tours in Vietnam. I worked on A-7E Corsairs, which is a light attack aircraft, and I think I personally handled in one cruise 7,500-pound bombs. I figured it out.
On January 14th, we were 75 miles off the coast of Hawaii. There's a small island out there that they practice bombing on. Same conditions as Vietnam. The planes are loaded with 250 to 500-pound bombs, missiles, etc. The first plane that they fired up, they had difficulty starting it. So now they're in a panic. They go over to the second aircraft, another Phantom jet. The fellow that parked the tow tractor has a small turbine on the back and has a 14-inch exhaust on the right-hand side. Moved the tractor to the right side of the aircraft and backed it in, and the exhaust was less than a foot away from the Zuni rocket. Safeties were pulled off the rocket because they were going to go out and bomb the island. The rocket fired, shot across the deck, hit a fuel tank on another Phantom jet, and put 1,800 gallons of JP4 across the deck underneath all GO aircraft with the bombs, etc. Fire, explosions. We lost 28 sailors that day. A lot more of my friends. And we had a lot of people that were very severely burnt. We came real close to losing the pride of the United States Navy at that time.
Exciting parts for me, of course, was going across the equator, where we had most of our crew, we had about a 4,400 complement on the aircraft carrier Enterprise, and about 3,600 had never been across. So it's a Navy ceremony that's been going on for hundreds of years.
We always had new people on board, and we got to initiate them, which back in the 60s was fairly brutal.
They have everything from giant engine tanks that's full of rotten food, and you dive in, come out the other side. When you get to the end, they have a large fellow, takes a slab of grease, puts it on his chest, and they have you come up and say, "What are you?" And you say, "I'm a shellback." And if you say anything else, anything, you start over. But they take your head and they rub it in that grease on this fellow's stomach. It's not a pleasant thing. Anyway, at the end of the ceremony, it lasts several hours, then they issue you a nice certificate that says that you moved into the shellback and you crossed the equator. So it is a rite of passage, if you would, to be in the Navy and go across the equator.
In the last 2 months of the war, when the North Vietnamese were overrunning the country, and there were many orphans that had to get out of the country because of fear of being persecuted or killed. Ford sent Air Force planes into South Vietnam to rescue 2,500 children from orphanages who had adoptive parents in the United States. And one of those adoptees was a little girl who we adopted. Operation Baby Lift was very successful, got 2,500 orphans out of the country as it was being overrun by the North Vietnamese Army.
A little thing I learned when I was working for the California Department of Food and Agriculture, they needed somebody to digitally map, and I had the computer background, so they got me doing it. And I loved doing it, and we were mapping aerial application work and stuff like that all up and down the state. A year after I retired, I was asked by a bunch of other vets if I would digitally map the Vietnam War. So I did. They took me back to Vietnam in 2017 to help find 3 of the missing from Hill 875, the battle in November of '67. My job during that time was to define the battlefield for them. So that's where I went. When I first got on the hill, I was thinking of the 127 Americans that lost their lives there. And about 40 of our dead were actually casualties when the Marine Corps TAC Air drops 2 500-pound bombs on the American position. And one of those hit right where they had the wounded and the dead stacked. So it killed all but one of the officers on the hill. 6 Hueys shot down on that hill. I was the 4th one. I came to a hover over NVA trench, and an NVA troop in the trench emptied his AK-47 into the bottom of my helicopter, the sides. And the rounds are coming up between me and the co-pilot through the floor. Went around behind me. All the engine lights went red. And so I told the guns covering me that I was going to try to get to a fire support base that was 3 kilometers away, which I did. But when I went to shut the aircraft off, I found out that the guy shooting at me had taken out our throttle linkage, so I had absolutely no control over the engine. It was just the governor that it was running on that kept it doing what it's supposed to do. The linkage was gone. We were the first Americans allowed back on that hill since the war. And when we came off of the hill after the second day we were on it, it really hit me hard emotionally, and all I could think of was my dad would be proud of me, just simply because I went back. You know, it was a place I didn't want to go to. After I left Vietnam the first time, I didn't want to go back. But to go back when they asked me if I would, I had to go. I couldn't say no.
The work was hard, and the work was important. And I learned there too that I need to do something that I'm proud of.
Intense, deployment, firefight, training, whatever the case it was, it sucked, but you all were in it together.
I loved flying. I have some of the most amazing stories of the places I've been.
Maybe around his junior year, there started to be enough interest that we knew that was a direction he wanted to go.
He said that my skills working in libraries would be very useful in the naval intelligence community. And I asked what everybody else asks, well, what is that? And he said, I can't tell you.
My real name is Steve Carilla. I use the name Samuel Hill. It's the only thing my dad ever did for me. I'd come home from missions and he'd like, who to Sam Hill do you think you are? So when I started writing, I used the name Samuel Hill. But I enlisted in 1976, went straight to Berlin. I ended up working the Soviet Spetsnaz, Special Operations, and the KGB/Stasi illicit agent program out of Berlin. And there was a lot of espionage going on at the height of the Cold War, really, 1976. And the illicit agents were deployed all over the world with all kinds of missions like assassinations and blowing up soldiers in housing areas and whatever. So our mission was to collect the Morse code, find the agents, locate them electronically, and then intervene. And this one young woman showed up. She says, you know what? My front porch light was sending Morse code last night. We're like, of course it was. You're a little nuts. She's like, no, honest to God. I'm like, okay, look, go collect it, write it down, bring it in, and I'll take a look at it. So she comes in with these piles of notebooks, and she'd been there for 2 days straight, copying Morse code, and we're like, there's no way. So she throws the books on my desk, and she's like, this is what the porch light told me last night. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And later on, I pick up these things, and I look at what she'd written, and I'm like, oh my God, where did she get this? It was real Morse code. It was a Soviet agent we'd been trying to find for about 4 years. He disappeared, we couldn't find him. Turns out he's in the basement of this apartment complex. And every time he's sending Morse code, it browns out the electricity. And the front porch light would dim and then come back up, and it was Morse code. It was flashing what he was sending. So we did a break-in and entering. We got his encipherment codes, and we broke the entire Soviet network. A couple of guys, Jerry King, Charlie Beckwith, everybody knows Charlie Beckwith, got together and they decided to do a joint special operations program. And I was at the very beginning of that. There was another subunit that had very, very short food chain. It was the President of the United States, the Secretary of Defense, and maybe one general officer involved in there. And we were smoke, we were ghosts. And you go into your mission and you come out and nobody knows you were gone, nobody knows when you came back. We were on a 72-hour mission that turned into 26 months. We were covert somewhere between Baghdad and Jordan, and that was our home base. And then we deploy from there and go on missions into Iraq and into Baghdad or wherever we happen to go, and collect intelligence. And then transmit it back on this 70-foot antenna pole. It was an electric over hydraulic pneumatic antenna system that went up in the sky, just like on the back of a TV truck. And then the antenna got stuck and we couldn't get it down because it got full of dirt. And I got up on top of that pole, and these reserve guys showed up, and they found us. And we looked like Iraqis and smelled like Iraqis, and the equipment we had they had never seen before, so they assumed we were Iraqis, and they launched a missile. And it went inside the tent, which was covered in sand, and I was above the sand up on the antenna pole. So a TOW missile, it's got a depleted uranium rod in the middle of it, and it's full of white phosphorus. And the phosphorus will not put out, you can't put it out. It will just continue to burn until it's depleted. But everybody inside got burned up with phosphorus. I had a serious head injury. I had fractures from hell. Walter Reed had taken out the wrong disc and the wrong vertebrae, and I ended up paralyzed from the diaphragm down in a chair. And when I left Walter Reed, I got home and someone else was living in my house. My wife had divorced me and taken my kids and deployed somewhere, gone. And I spent 2 years as a homeless guy in a park, paralyzed in a wheelchair, and trying to figure out what do you do now. And all of that was going on. I was pretty much in primal, what we call blackout drive. I was in primal mode, trying to wrestle with the demons that I had about what had happened in the desert and the betrayal. And then one doctor out of 100+ doctors that said, look, take your pills, stay in your wheelchair, we're gonna send you to a nursing home. And this one guy, I don't know, I think we can fix you. And he ends up coming up with this new technology. It's called a dorsal column stimulator implant, and it's inside my spinal cord, and it's wired to a battery pack and a computer in my hip, and everything from my diaphragm down runs off electricity now. And I've been doing 39 surgeries so far with a computer inside my spinal cord to get me out of the wheelchair and get me walking again. The book started out as a thing I was doing with a psychiatrist. I kept having nightmares and couldn't get him to stop, so I went to see a shrink. So he told me, look, you got so much stuff in your closet. You know, you got to start writing some things down in some sort of a chronological order so that we can start addressing things in little small bites. And that turned into a book. And then that book was way too big, so we turned it into 3 books, 10 years each of the 30-year career. And then once I hit my stride and figured out what I was doing, so far we're up to 10 books, and it could stretch into many more.
My name is Paula Wold. I am a retired Chief Petty Officer in the U.S. Navy, and I joined the Navy late. I made my goal of becoming the first female combat air crewman. I was my honor grad in air crew school at 32 years old. You know, I had a relentless, I'm not gonna give up, you're not gonna beat me kind of thing. I started flying just a few months after the tailhook scandal. So I wasn't terribly welcomed by the guys when I started to fly. I flew on P-3s, which is a large aircraft. We had several people on the crew. And my first deployment, I went to Iceland. Second deployment to the Middle East in support of Desert Shield. And another deployment to Westpac. So I've been all over the world. I got to fly through the Northern Lights all night long up above the Arctic Circle, which who gets to say that in their lifetime? I flew for 4 years, and in that process, I developed breast cancer. So my journey then became about healing, and consequently, that is the time when I stopped flying and became a Navy drug and alcohol counselor. So currently working at the Fresno Vet Center, dealing mostly with Vietnam vets, which are the most amazing people in the world. Absolutely no regrets, completely honor my service and honor those who served and have served.
My name is Virginia Sanchez. I am a Chief Petty Officer, which is an E7 in the United States Navy Reserve. And I enlisted in April 1999. I was in my master's program and I was already managing a library because I knew I wanted to become a librarian. I came in as a reservist with experience and a skill set that was perfect for this particular community. I mean, since you've worked in libraries, you know it's a can be very inattentive. Eventually, I was made an intelligence specialist, and in September 2007, I got my orders to report to Afghanistan. I myself was the lead driver on over 30 convoys outside the wire, as we call it. And we took incoming RPGs and small arm fires on one incident. In my spare time at Camp Black Horse, being a librarian, I built a library. One of the chief petty officers said to me, Sanchez, when I was working in the library after hours on my own time, said, it's really great that you want to build this library because it's what you do on the civilian side, but no one's ever going to care. I won so many awards because of that library. And when I got the children's books sent in so that the service members could read to their kids if they had a laptop that had a webcam, so that they could read children's books to their kids, which is based on the United Through Reading program, which is a USO thing. What the Army guys would use the children's books for, not just to read to their kids, but to work with their Afghan counterparts to teach them English. So there were so many ways. I mean, like one of the most popular books that got borrowed, meaning taken, I never got the books back, hardly ever. That's okay. The dictionaries.
I'm Bryce Turner. I enlisted in the United States Army in 2001, and my enlistment went all the way to 2003. I was part of the 165th Military Intelligence E Company 51st Alerts, long-range surveillance. Job was, we would load up and jump behind enemy lines and observe the enemy. That was what we were trained to do. It was close to the 4th of July. A couple of guys and I, we wanted to get out of Germany. So we spent 3 days at the 173rd Airborne in Italy. We got back, we changed into our military attire, and I got down into formation. I had maybe an hour and a half sleep, and our first sergeant came out and asked for jumpers. So my hand went up, a few others from 1st platoon, 3, 4 maybe from 3rd platoon. When I was gonna go get my rucksack, a sergeant who was also a master sergeant put a rucksack in front of me, said, "You will be jumping with this." So I said, okay. I was so tired. We loaded up into the plane. I was second to last, and I fell asleep. And then when I woke up, everybody was standing up, and I was so tired. They were going, and the jump master kept issuing me forward. I had so much weight that I was literally going back and forth in that plane. The jump static line was too tall for me. I was like issuing my jump master. He's told me to come forward. I handed him my static line, and I jumped, and I fell. People go through traumatic experience where they nearly think they're gonna die and think of their Lord and Savior. I did not think of my Lord and Savior. I thought of my dad holding me as a kid. When I also pushed my reserve chute, I grabbed my static lines. I hit the ground, my helmet came off when my chin strap stayed on, and my helmet was just knocked around. We got back to the base, I couldn't sleep. There was a lot of things need to be done because they're also preparing to take off for Afghanistan and Iraq. All the teams were, and so the next few days I couldn't think, and I kept trying to tell my sergeants that, but we were loading ammo cans, nets, you name it, and I couldn't think properly. I said I need to go to the doctor. They took me to the hospital, and I was sedated for over a month and a half at the hospital, but a sergeant did come see me from 2nd platoon, and I said, "Take me back." He said, "Your war is over. Your war is done, Turner." I lied about this for years. My plane ride home, I was loaded up with the wounded from Afghanistan. There was There is close to 15 of us. I was one of the walking wounded with two medic corpsmen sitting next to me, and there were stretchers in the C-130, and they were wounded. They had blown off arms and legs, about 9 of them, and you put stuff behind your mind, and it just, when they're crying for their mamas, and you can't do anything for them. And I tried to, but the medics put me back in my seat. I was in Walter Reed for 5 months, and 2.5 months I was getting mental, cognitive therapy. It took close to 5 months to get healthy again, for me to talk normal again, and I was discharged from the Army.
The reunion that I went to in October, when a bunch of us got together on the East Coast, I asked, he's now retired as commander, but he was Navy lieutenant at the time, and I said, "Lieutenant, when I came to you and I trying to get your help for all this harassment that I was experiencing, and you turned me away and said that you had bigger fires to put out than my problems." He said he's sorry that he wasn't able to do more for me. He also shared something very interesting, that as a man of smaller stature, he was also a target. And I saw that. I saw males getting victimized. That's ridiculous.
My name is Sally Moreno, and interestingly, I got out as a captain, but through some sort of a military glitch, They promoted me after I got out to major. Well, really what happened, I got to UC Santa Barbara, and there was this inter-sorority volleyball tournament, which was a bunch of girls in bikinis, and this sorority rush, which was a bunch of girls in low-cut dresses, and I was like, okay, that's not me. I've never been that person. So I was looking around for people like me, and ROTC was doing some whitewater rafting, and I was like, yes. So that's how I got sucked in. I did have a military family, so I was very comfortable there. But I found my groove there with the ROTC department in Santa Barbara. So I was actually a rookie police officer in the LAPD when I was activated in support of Desert Storm in early 1991. I was a military police officer, second lieutenant, almost first lieutenant when I was activated. All of my service during Desert Storm was in the continental United States. We militarized civilian ports, ports from Seattle, Tacoma, San Diego, and then in the Gulf of Mexico. Another really valuable lesson that I got out of the service was the whole mission first, you know. I would come together, and obviously I was the leader, I was the officer, but it was a team effort, whatever we did and whenever we did it, and I always worked hard to build that team. And that has stood me in good stead. I now lead an office of about 20 lawyers, and if you know anything about lawyers, you can pray for me. They're about as hard to manage as cats. But we work together, and we work in the same fashion. You know, when things go bad, you just put on your game face and keep charging.
My name is Dr. Kermit Jones. I was a lieutenant in the Navy. I had the privilege of being a Navy physician with the Marine Helicopter Squadron. So I started out, I was my third year of medical school when 9/11 happened. At the time, I read a New York Times article that had a doctor that was resuscitating an Iraqi baby. And I saw that and said, that's exactly what I want to do. I called the recruiter. The recruiter got me into the system, and I ended up at Camp Pendleton, California, attached to a Marine Helicopter Squadron, HMM 364 at Purple Foxes. Our job was to take care of injured people and service members in Iraq, get them to hospitals and get them to Baghdad where they could be stabilized and then continue on to come back to the United States.
My name's Finley Turner. I joined the U.S. Army right out of high school. Deployed to Iraq, made the big push in 2003 into Baghdad, and went up to Balad, and then my unit was one of the first ones to get into Balad. The 1st of June, we got hit with a bunch of RPGs while we were doing a checkpoint operation. They moved our checkpoint to a different route. Like, we got ambushed the following night. Myself and my team leader, we were outside of the checkpoint stopping vehicles before they got into the checkpoint. And when everything went down, we got caught kind of in the middle. I took shrapnel wounds from an RPG. My team leader took an AK round that ricocheted off the asphalt in front of us to his forehead, called for a medic. Ended up losing Sergeant Harlow that night. Because of my actions, I got my Silver Star, Purple Heart. A year and a half later, I went to my friend's great grave down in Los Angeles. We were both from California, and left those awards on his grave.
I know Justin specifically because he's very type A, chose Army infantry, and he was deployed in the drawdown in Iraq. If I recall correctly, most of the time he spent driving. It caused him a lot of angst because there was always IEDs, and so every time they're on the road, that scanning and looking, and even when he first came back, getting angry when he was driving was very simple, and that's that fight or flight syndrome kicking in. He was honorably discharged. I think some of the things that didn't get dealt with PTSD-wise started to amplify, because when he came back from Iraq, very frustrated with leadership specific to the military. Once he got out, it didn't change. Even in private industry, he had the same struggles. People are people.
And I started a program called Tier 1 Tranquility Base for veterans. And every soldier that comes home spends a 5 to 7 year period where we have that same mentality we have in the Rangers and the Green Berets and infantry guys. I'm good. Dude, you don't look so good. No, I'm good. Well, we haven't heard from you in 2 weeks. No, I'm good. And you just deny it and you deny it, and they got a locked jaw and their arms across, they got glasses on with their hat pulled down, their battle beard, you know, the whole thing. And when you finally pick through that onion peel and get a guy to trust you, then there's a commonality. And that's what my books have done. Guys read the book and they're like, dude, I had no idea. I thought my shit was bad. I'm like, yeah, let me tell you some bad shit, because my shit ain't bad either. And that's, so Tier 1 is a 501c3 now, it's a public thing.
When somebody starts to feel empty or let's say void of hope, not having direction, they may not necessarily be to the point of suicidal, but then they go hear about veteran A. Well, I knew that guy, I went to basic with him, he just committed suicide. 6 or 8 of the individuals in Justin's unit had committed suicide. So even if he was not having as big a struggle, that starts to become a huge weight on each individual's shoulders.
We've lost 7,280 soldiers, men and women, since 9/11 in combat, and over 160,000 have committed suicide. You know, we train our soldiers to go to war, but we don't train them how to come home.
When we talk about World War II and even Korea, the general feeling that was prevalent in society was you don't talk about mental illness, right? You just suck it up and drive on. And those guys never talked about their stuff, and they were expected to be the breadwinners and the heads of the household and show that strength. And I think out of that, they've suffered until they pass. With the Gulf War and the OEF, OIF folks, particularly the OEF, OIF and the GWAT people, these are multiple tours that these folks have been on. They've been back to war 6 and 7 and 8 times. So I look forward and I go, if our Vietnam vets 50 years later are struggling every night with PTSD from one tour, what are these guys gonna look like in 40 years when they've been back 6 and 7 times? So I think a lot of it is about folks first honoring their own feelings and resting into those feelings, which is very difficult because they're very painful feelings, and then teach them better how to manage the symptoms of PTSD, because it's not something that goes away.
You only get to a 6 and you can learn that, hey, I'm safe, this is not so bad. Then you can start to redirect some of that neural pathway that has been ingrained because of PTSD and 6 or 8 years of poor coping.
I can't help you forget. What I can help you do is have a better relationship with your memories. And that's what we hope for every time with these folks.
It's not easy, but it is doable. I mean, to stick with somebody you love and you care about.
I remember them with a warm feeling in my heart. These guys were no different at that point than I was. They came from home. They were going for a purpose and had a mission.
One thing I wish a lot of my generation and older generations of veterans is the more you hang on to the past, the more it swallows you up.
But if anybody wants to see the fallacy of war, ought to be a combat medic for a while. They pay you to go out and kill somebody, and then they pay you to go out and save his life. You know, it's pitiful.
It's something that has bothered me, but I try to focus on the good things, and that I did come home, and I'm not too screwed up from being overseas.
They say, oh, I wouldn't get scared. Well, you get scared, right?
I was very happy on the 22nd of November 1968 when I left the country.
If some good thing can be said to come out of a war, it's that we have this wonderful daughter from Vietnam. And it was the best decision my wife Arlene and I made in our 54 years of marriage.
On a trip with 2 other fellows from the Mariposa Rotary Club, went to a luncheon meeting in Rome. And I had as much fun in that meeting in Rome as I had in my meeting in the Mariposa Club, because the Italians were having a lot of fun teasing us. One of the members of their club was a retired naval officer. And they insisted that he come over and talk to these 3 Americans that were there, because it was the Americans that had sunk his ship in the harbor during the war. And you know, at that point, I was, as I say, active in Rotary, and I thought more Rotary people around the world would help us prevent wars, because I couldn't imagine going back and fighting those Italians again.